The wind howled across the desolate prairie, as Felicity Eastwood clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, watching her father stagger through the swinging doors of the Lucky Ace Saloon. It was the spring of 1878 in Medicine Bow, Wyoming, and at 20 years old, Felicity had grown painfully accustomed to the sight of Orville Eastwood disappearing into the saloon with what little money they had left to their names. Felicity stood on the weathered boardwalk, the setting sun casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street. Her mother had passed 3 winters ago from consumption, leaving Felicity to manage their small homestead and care for her increasingly desperate father. Once a respected rancher, Orville had taken to the bottle and cards after his wife's death, gambling away their land acre by acre until all that remained was a ramshackle cabin on the edge of town and a few scrawny chickens. "You ain't coming in tonight, Miss Eastwood," called Mabel, the aging saloon girl who sometimes slipped Felicity leftover food when Orville drank away their supper money. "No, Mabel. Just waiting to make sure he doesn't cause any trouble," Felicity replied, her voice soft but resolute. Her golden brown hair blew across her face, and she tucked it behind her ear with a calloused hand, Mabel's painted face creased with concern. "There's a big game tonight. Some cattle buyers and that new fella in town, the one they call the Ghost." Felicity's stomach tightened. The last thing they needed was her father playing against professional gamblers. "Thank you for telling me," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. As darkness fell over Medicine Bow, Felicity reluctantly headed home. The cabin was cold and empty, like her future seemed to be. She lit a lamp and began mending one of her father's shirts, the needle flashing in the dim light as she worked. The hours ticked by, marked only by the distant coyotes and the occasional burst of laughter from the direction of town. It was well past midnight when the door crashed open. Orville Eastwood stumbled in, his face ashen in the lamplight. "What happened?" Felicity asked, rising to her feet. She could tell from his expression that something was terribly wrong. "Nothing," her father slurred, avoiding her gaze. "Go to bed, girl." But Felicity stood her ground. "What did you lose this time, father?" Orville's bloodshot eyes finally met hers, and a chill ran down her spine at the mixture of shame and defeat she saw there. "Everything," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I lost everything." "The cabin," Felicity's heart raced. "But it's all we have left." Orville sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "Not just the cabin, Felicity." "What do you mean?" A sense of dread washed over her. "I had nothing left to wager," he mumbled, "and I was sure I could win it back. My hand was strong, but his was stronger." Felicity gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "What did you do?" "I wagered the only thing of value I had left." Orville looked up at her, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You, daughter, I wagered you." The world seemed to tilt beneath Felicity's feet. "You." "What?" The words came out as barely a whisper. "I bet your hand in marriage against my debts. If I'd won, we'd have had enough to start over." Orville's voice was pleading now. "But I lost. To the Ghost. To Zachariah King." Felicity felt as if she'd been struck. Her own father had gambled away her freedom, her future, her very self to a stranger. "When?" she managed to ask through numb lips. "He's coming at noon tomorrow to claim his winnings." Orville couldn't meet her eyes anymore. Felicity stood perfectly still, shock giving way to a cold fury. "How could you?" "I'm sorry, Felicity. You thought what? That I was property to be wagered, that my life meant so little." Her voice rose with each word. "Mother would be ashamed of you. I am ashamed of you." Orville flinched as if she'd struck him. "He's not a bad man, Felicity. They say he's fair, at least. A cattle baron from Texas, owns half the range south of here now." "I don't care if he owns all of Wyoming territory," Felicity shot back. "I won't be handed over like a prize heifer." But even as the words left her mouth, Felicity knew she had no choice. In the frontier West, a deal was a deal, especially one made over cards. If she ran, her father would likely face far worse than humiliation. Men had been shot for less in Medicine Bow. She turned away, tears blurring her vision. "Get out of my sight," she told her father. "Sleep in the barn with the animals where you belong." After Orville slunk out, Felicity sank to the floor, her body shaking with silent sobs. In the small trunk beneath her bed lay her mother's wedding dress, preserved all these years. Never had she imagined wearing it for a man who had won her in a card game. As dawn broke across the eastern sky, Felicity had cried herself dry. She rose, washed her face in the basin of cold water, and began packing her meager belongings. If she was to be this man's wife, she would at least keep her dignity. Promptly at noon, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart hammer in her chest. She stood in the center of the cabin, dressed in her best blue calico dress, her hair neatly braided and pinned. Her father hovered near the door, sober for once and clearly terrified. The rider who dismounted outside was not what Felicity had expected. From Mabel's whispers and her father's fear, she had imagined a grizzled, hardened gambler. The man who ducked to enter the low doorway was tall and broad-shouldered, yes, but surprisingly young, perhaps no more than 30. His black hat cast shadows over piercing gray eyes, and his clean-shaven face was deeply tanned from the sun. "Mr. Eastwood," he said with a nod, his voice deep and measured. His gaze shifted to Felicity, and something flickered in those gray eyes, surprise, perhaps, or uncertainty. "Mr. King," Orville responded, his voice trembling. "This is my daughter, Felicity." Zachariah King studied her for a long moment. "Miss Eastwood," he said finally, tipping his hat. Felicity didn't respond. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of her fear or her anger. "Your daughter doesn't seem pleased with our arrangement," King observed dryly. "Would you be, sir, if you were wagered away like a sack of flour?" Felicity finally spoke, her voice steady despite her churning emotions. A hint of a smile touched King's lips. "No, I don't believe I would." He turned to Orville. "Mr. Eastwood, I'll need a word with you outside." The two men stepped out onto the porch, leaving Felicity alone with her thoughts. She could hear their low voices but couldn't make out the words. Minutes later, the door opened again, and King entered alone. "Where's my father?" Felicity demanded. "Gone to settle some business in town," King replied, removing his hat. Without the shadow, his features were even more striking: high cheekbones, a straight nose, and those intense gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. "I won't go with you," Felicity declared, her chin lifted defiantly. "I wouldn't expect you to," King said, surprising her. "Not like this." He pulled a folded document from inside his vest and placed it on the table. "This is the deed to your cabin and the surrounding 5 acres. It's yours now, free and clear." Felicity stared at the paper, uncomprehending. "What? And this," he continued, setting a small pouch beside the deed, "is enough money to keep you comfortable for a while. Should you choose to sell and move elsewhere, it's your right." "I don't understand," Felicity said slowly. "Did you not come to claim me?" King's expression softened slightly. "Miss Eastwood, I came to rectify a wrong. No man has the right to wager another human being, especially not his own daughter." "Then why did you accept the wager?" Felicity challenged. "Because your father would have found someone else to accept it if I hadn't," King answered simply. "Someone who might not have given you a choice." Felicity's mind whirled with confusion. This made no sense. "What do you want from me then?" "Nothing," King said. "You're free to live your life as you see fit." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Your father has agreed to leave Medicine Bow. He's taking the afternoon stage to Laramie, where he has a cousin who's offered him work. He asked me to tell you goodbye." Felicity felt as if the ground had dropped from beneath her feet. "He's leaving. Without saying goodbye," he thought it best, King said quietly. "For what it's worth, I believe he's truly ashamed of what he's done." With that, Zachariah King placed his hat back on his head and stepped outside. Felicity heard him mount his horse, the jingle of tack and the soft thud of hooves growing fainter as he rode away. She stood motionless in the center of the cabin, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The man who had won her in a poker game had set her free instead, and her father had abandoned her without even a farewell. For the first time in her life, Felicity Eastwood was truly alone. The days that followed passed in a strange haze for Felicity. She kept expecting to wake and find it had all been a dream, that her father would stagger and drunk, or that Zachariah King would return to claim what he had won. But neither happened. The deed on the table was real, as was the money in the pouch, more than she had seen in years. A week after King's visit, Felicity was hanging laundry behind the cabin when she heard approaching riders. Her heart leapt to her throat until she recognized Sheriff Milton and his deputy. "Morning, Miss Eastwood," the sheriff called, tipping his hat. "Just checking to see how you're faring on your own." "I'm managing, Sheriff," Felicity replied, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Town's been talking," Deputy Hawkins said bluntly. "Ain't proper, a young lady living out here alone." Felicity stiffened. "This is my property, Deputy. I've the deed to prove it." "Now, no one's disputing that," Sheriff Milton said soothingly. "But folks are concerned for your welfare is all. Mrs. Tanner at the boarding house mentioned she has a room available should you want to move to town." Felicity understood the unspoken message. A single woman living alone was subject to gossip, suspicion, and worse. Yet the thought of abandoning the last piece of her family's legacy, the home her mother had loved, was unbearable. "Thank you for your concern," she said carefully, "but I'll stay here for now." The sheriff frowned. "Miss Eastwood, I must insist you consider, is there a law against me living on my own property, Sheriff?" Felicity interrupted, her patience wearing thin. "No, madam, there is not," he admitted reluctantly. "Then I believe that settles it." She turned back to her laundry, signaling the conversation was over. After the lawman departed, Felicity sank onto a stump, trembling slightly. She had never been one to challenge authority, but desperation made her bold. Still, she knew the sheriff had a point. A woman alone in the Wyoming territory faced dangers beyond mere gossip. That evening, as Felicity was preparing her solitary supper, another visitor arrived. This time it was Mabel from the saloon, looking oddly respectable in a plain dress with her hair tied back. "Brought you some pie," Mabel announced without preamble, setting a cloth-covered dish on the table. "And some news you might want to hear." "Thank you," Felicity said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "What news?" Mabel settled her ample frame into a chair. "Your Mr. King's been asking about you in town." "He's not my Mr. King," Felicity objected immediately. "That ain't what he thinks," Mabel said with a knowing smile. "Ask Doc Wilson if you had kin nearby. Asked Pastor Evans if the church ladies were checking on you." Felicity frowned. "Why would he care? Men are strange creatures, honey," Mabel said, helping herself to coffee. "Especially ones like the ghost." "Why do they call him that?" Felicity couldn't help asking. "Because he appears out of nowhere, takes what he wants, and vanishes again," Mabel explained. "Been drifting through these parts for years, building up his cattle empire. Never stays in one place long. Until now, seems that way. Bought the old Thompson ranch outright last week. Hired a dozen hands already." Mabel leaned forward conspirationally. "And word is, he's building a proper house there. Not just fixing up the old place, but building new." A big house. Felicity absorbed this information silently. She couldn't fathom why Zachariah King would take an interest in her welfare, nor why he would suddenly decide to put down roots in Medicine Bow. "There's something else you should know," Mabel continued, her tone growing serious. "Clem Tucker's been asking about you too, the wrong kind of asking." Felicity's blood ran cold. Clem Tucker was the local cattle baron, a man known for his temper and his belief that money could buy him anything or anyone he desired. "Said it's a shame such a pretty thing is all alone out here," Mabel went on. "Said he might have to pay you a neighborly visit." "Let him try," Felicity said with more bravado than she felt. She had her father's old shotgun, but the thought of having to use it made her stomach churn. Mabel shook her head. "Don't play brave, girl. Tucker's dangerous. He's got the town council in his pocket and half the county terrified of him." After Mabel left, Felicity bolted the door and checked the shotgun, setting it within reach of her bed. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of faceless men trying to claim her. The next morning, Felicity was feeding the chickens when she heard the distinctive sound of a wagon approaching. She hurried inside for the shotgun, then stood on the porch, her heart pounding. To her amazement, it was Zachariah King himself driving the wagon, with a young boy of about 12 seated beside him and the back loaded with supplies. "Miss Eastwood," King called, pulling the team to a halt. "I've brought some things you might need." Felicity lowered the shotgun, confusion and wariness warring within her. "Mr. King, this is unexpected." He jumped down from the wagon with easy grace. "I hope it's not unwelcome. This is Tommy," he added, gesturing to the boy. "He works for me. Tommy, meet Miss Eastwood." The boy touched the brim of his cap. "Madam." "Tommy, start unloading," King instructed. He turned back to Felicity. "May I speak with you?" Reluctantly, she nodded, and they moved a few paces from the wagon. "Sheriff Milton mentioned you're determined to stay out here," King began. "You've been discussing me with the sheriff?" Felicity asked, bristling. "I've been concerned," he admitted. "A woman alone, I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself, Mr. King." A fleeting smile crossed his face. "I don't doubt your capability, Miss Eastwood." "But capability doesn't stop men like Clem Tucker." Felicity went still. "How do you know about Tucker?" "Medicine Bow is a small town, and I make it my business to know who holds the power." King's gray eyes hardened. "Tucker's had his eye on this piece of land for years. Your father refused to sell, even at his lowest. And now you think Tucker will try to force me out?" Felicity asked, though she already knew the answer. "I think he'll try to acquire you along with the land," King said bluntly. "Men like Tucker see women as possessions, not people." "Like my father did," Felicity couldn't help pointing out. King had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Your father made a terrible mistake in a moment of desperation. Tucker's calculation is cold and deliberate." He gestured toward the wagon. "I've brought supplies: flour, coffee, preserves. A proper lock for your door. And Tommy here will stay in the barn for a while if you'll allow it. He's young, but he's handy with tools and a good shot." Felicity stared at him, torn between indignation at his presumption and relief at the offered protection. "Why are you doing this, Mr. King?" For a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. Felicity studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. "And what do you want in return?" she asked cautiously. "Nothing," he said, and she believed him. "Your father's debt to me is settled. You owe me nothing." After a moment's consideration, Felicity nodded her agreement. "Tommy can stay in the barn, and I appreciate the supplies." Relief flashed across King's features. "Good. I'll have some of my men ride by regularly, just to keep an eye on things." As King and Tommy unloaded the wagon, Felicity found herself watching the tall rancher. He worked efficiently, directing the boy with patient instructions rather than harsh commands. His movements were graceful despite his size, and several times she caught him glancing her way when he thought she wasn't looking. Before departing, King paused at the wagon. "Miss Eastwood, there's a social at the church this Saturday. Perhaps you might consider attending." "Are you inviting me, Mr. King?" Felicity asked, surprised. "I'm suggesting it might be good for you to be seen in town among respectable folk," he clarified. "Makes it harder for Tucker to spread rumors about you." "I see." Felicity wasn't sure if she felt disappointed or relieved by his practical reasoning. "I'll consider it." After King left, Tommy proved to be a quiet but efficient helper, repairing loose boards on the porch and checking the roof for leaks. He told Felicity he'd been working for the boss for 3 years, ever since King had found him orphaned after an Indian raid in Colorado. "Mr. King's a good man," the boy said earnestly as they shared supper that evening. "Best I ever met, treats his people fair. Even the Mexicans and the colored folk." "Has he always traveled so much?" Felicity asked, trying to sound casual. Tommy nodded, his mouth full of biscuit. "Never stays nowhere long. That's why everyone's surprised he bought the Thompson place. Says he's tired of drifting." That night, as Felicity lay in bed listening to the distant howl of coyotes, she found herself wondering about the enigmatic Zachariah King. What had made a notorious drifter decide to put down roots? And why did he seem so determined to protect her? Saturday arrived clear and warm. Felicity spent the morning agonizing over whether to attend the church social. Her plain calico dresses seemed woefully inadequate for her first public appearance since her father's disgrace. Finally, she unearthed a blue gingham dress her mother had made years ago, altering it quickly to fit her slender frame. "You look real nice, Miss Eastwood," Tommy said when she emerged from the cabin. "Thank you, Tommy," she replied, suddenly nervous. "Are you sure you'll be all right here alone?" The boy puffed out his chest. "Mr. King's counting on me to watch the place. I won't let nothing happen." The walk to town was just over a mile, and Felicity found herself searching the road ahead for any sign of Zachariah King. Part of her hoped he might appear to escort her, while another part dreaded the gossip such an appearance would generate in the end. She arrived at the churchyard alone, acutely aware of the curious stares and hushed conversations that followed her. The women of Medicine Bow nodded politely but kept their distance. The men were bolder, several approaching to offer refreshments or conversation, their eyes holding speculative gleams that made Felicity's skin crawl. "Miss Eastwood, what a pleasant surprise," Pastor Evans greeted her warmly. "We've missed you at services." "Thank you, Pastor," Felicity replied, grateful for his kindness. "I hope to attend more regularly now." "You're always welcome here," the pastor assured her before being called away to settle a dispute between 2 young boys. Felicity found a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree, content to observe the social interactions from a distance. She was so focused on avoiding attention that she didn't notice the man approaching until his shadow fell across her. Well, the Eastwood girl, all grown up and looking mighty fine. Felicity's head snapped up to find Clem Tucker standing before her, his fleshy face split in a predatory smile. Despite the warm day, he wore a formal black suit and vest that strained across his substantial belly. "Mr. Tucker," she acknowledged coldly, rising to her feet. "If you'll excuse me," Tucker blocked her path. "No need to rush off. I've been meaning to pay you a visit out at that little cabin of yours." "I prefer visitors to announce themselves in advance," Felicity said, trying to step around him. Tucker's meaty hand closed around her arm. "Now, that ain't neighborly. A pretty girl like you, all alone, you must get lonely." "Remove your hand, Mr. Tucker," Felicity said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Or what?" Tucker's grip tightened painfully. "Your daddy ain't here to protect you anymore, girl. Might be time you found yourself a new protector." "The lady asked you to let go," came a quiet voice from behind Tucker. Zachariah King stood there, his tall frame relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. Tucker's face darkened with anger, but he released Felicity's arm. "King, didn't know you had an interest here." "Miss Eastwood is under my protection," King said evenly. "I'd take it as a personal affront if she were troubled in any way." The two men stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Finally, Tucker forced a laugh. "Just being friendly, King, no harm in that." "None at all," King agreed, his tone making it clear he didn't believe Tucker for a moment. "Miss Eastwood, would you care for some lemonade?" Grateful for the rescue, Felicity moved to King's side. "Thank you, Mr. King. I would." As they walked away, Felicity could feel Tucker's eyes boring into her back. "He won't give up so easily," she murmured. "No, he won't," King agreed. "Tucker's used to getting what he wants." "So are you, I imagine," Felicity observed. A smile touched King's lips. "I've learned to choose my battles carefully, Miss Eastwood." "And I'm one of your battles?" she asked, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. King stopped walking and turned to face her. "You misunderstand me. I'm not fighting for possession of you, Miss Eastwood. I'm fighting for your right to belong to no one but yourself." The sincerity in his eyes took her breath away. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by Mrs. Tanner from the boarding house. "Mr. King, we were hoping you'd favor us with a song," the older woman gushed, casting a disapproving glance at Felicity. "You have such a fine voice." "Perhaps later, Mrs. Tanner," King replied politely but firmly. "I was just getting Miss Eastwood some refreshment." As the social continued, Felicity found herself constantly in King's company. He introduced her to several of his ranch hands and their families, all of whom treated her with respect. When the musicians struck up a lively tune, King surprised her by asking her to dance. "I'm not very practiced," Felicity warned as he led her to the open space serving as a dance floor. "Neither am I," King admitted, placing one hand lightly at her waist. "But I reckon we can manage not to trample each other's toes." As they moved to the music, Felicity was acutely aware of his nearness, of the strength in the hand holding hers, of the clean scent of soap and leather that surrounded him. For the first time since her father's betrayal, she felt truly safe. "People are staring," she whispered, noticing the curious glances directed their way. "Let them," King said simply. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, Felicity." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something in her chest fluttered at the sound of it on his lips. The dance ended too soon, and King was immediately approached by a group of cattlemen eager to discuss business. Felicity excused herself and wandered to the refreshment table, where she encountered Mabel, looking surprisingly respectable in a high-necked dress. "Well, well," the former saloon girl said with a knowing smile. "Seems you've caught the ghost's eye after all." "It's not like that," Felicity protested. "He's just being kind." Mabel snorted. "Zachariah King ain't known for charity cases, honey. If he's dancing with you in public, he's staking a claim." "I'm not something to be claimed," Felicity said sharply. "Course you ain't," Mabel agreed. "But Tucker needs to think you are, or he'll never leave you be." As twilight descended, King offered to escort Felicity home. They walked in companionable silence, the western sky ablaze with color ahead of them. "Thank you," Felicity said finally. "For today, for everything." King glanced down at her. "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do," she insisted. "You've shown me nothing but kindness when you could have." She trailed off, unable to voice the alternative. "I could never have held you to that wager," King said quietly. The moment I saw you standing in that cabin, so brave and defiant, I knew I'd done the right thing accepting your father's foolish bet. If it hadn't been me, it would have been someone else, someone like Tucker." They had reached the cabin where Tommy was waiting anxiously on the porch. The boy visibly relaxed when he saw them approach together. "Everything quiet, Tommy?" King called. "Yes, sir, Mr. King," the boy replied. "Just like you said to keep it." King turned to Felicity. "I should go. My foreman's bringing a new herd in tomorrow and I need to be there." "Of course," Felicity said, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "Thank you again for the escort." He hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. "Felicity," he said, his voice low, "I meant what I said to Tucker. You have my protection for whatever it's worth, but I want you to know it comes with no expectations, no obligations." "I believe you," she said, and was surprised to realize it was true. King lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the brief contact sending warmth rushing through her. "Good night, Miss Eastwood." As he rode away with Tommy, Felicity stood on the porch, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. For the first time in years, hope flickered in her heart, not just for safety or survival, but for something more. Spring gave way to summer, and Felicity found herself settling into a new routine. 3 times a week, she traveled into town to sell eggs and vegetables from her small garden at the general store. On Sundays, she attended church services, where she gradually began to rebuild her standing in the community. Zachariah King remained a constant, if somewhat distant, presence in her life. True to his word, his men rode by regularly to check on her, always respectful and never intrusive. Occasionally, King himself would appear, bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, seeds for her garden, a new blanket for the coming winter. They would talk for a while, usually on the porch, his deep voice and thoughtful observations drawing Felicity out of her shell. She learned that he had been orphaned young, raised by an uncle who taught him the cattle business before drinking himself to death. That he had fought briefly in the war, despite being only 16 when it ended. That he had a younger sister somewhere back east, married to a banker in Boston. In turn, she shared stories of her mother, of happier days on the ranch before consumption and alcohol had destroyed her family. She found herself laughing more, the bitterness that had taken root in her heart slowly giving way to something softer. Clem Tucker, meanwhile, maintained a threatening presence on the edges of Felicity's life. Twice, she had caught his men watching the cabin from a distance. Once, in town, he had cornered her in the general store, his whispered promises of protection carrying unmistakable threats. "You can't hide behind King forever," Tucker had hissed. "Man like that will move on eventually, but I'll still be here, waiting." Despite her fear, Felicity refused to be intimidated. She carried the shotgun whenever she went to town alone and made sure never to be on the roads after dark. Her determination to maintain her independence only seemed to grow stronger with each challenge. One sweltering August afternoon, Felicity was returning from town when a sudden thunderstorm erupted. Within minutes, the dusty road turned to mud, and rain pounded down so hard she could barely see. Lightning cracked across the sky, and her horse shied nervously, seeking shelter. Felicity spotted a barn on the horizon, part of the old Thompson Ranch, now King's property. She urged her horse toward it, relieved when the building loomed through the curtain of rain. Inside, she dismounted and led her horse to an empty stall, grateful for the solid roof overhead. The storm raged outside, wind howling through the cracks in the weathered wood. "Miss Eastwood." Felicity spun around, her heart leaping to her throat. Zachariah King stood in the doorway of what appeared to be a tack room, shirt sleeves rolled up and a look of surprise on his face. "Mr. King, I'm so sorry to intrude. The storm caught me and this was the nearest shelter. No intrusion at all, he assured her, stepping closer. You're soaked through. Felicity looked down at her dress, now plastered to her body and dripping onto the barn floor. I'm afraid so. Come, King said, gesturing to the tack room. There's a stove lit in here. You should get warm before you catch your death. The small room was surprisingly cozy, with a pot-bellied stove radiating heat, a desk covered with papers, and a cot in one corner. King quickly gathered the papers and tucked them into a drawer. Ranch accounts, he explained. I come out here sometimes when the bunkhouse gets too noisy for thinking. He pulled a woolen blanket from the cot and offered it to Felicity. You should get out of that wet dress. At her startled look, he added hastily, I'll wait outside, of course. No, Felicity said, suddenly shy. I mean, there's no need. I can just wrap the blanket around me over my clothes. King nodded, turning his back politely as she arranged the blanket around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate and welcome after the chill of the rain. Better, he asked, glancing over his shoulder. Much, she admitted, settling onto a wooden chair he pulled up for her. Outside, the storm continued unabated, lightning illuminating the barn in brief, brilliant flashes followed by deafening thunder. Looks like you might be stuck here a while, King observed, pouring coffee from a pot on the stove. He handed her a tin cup, their fingers brushing momentarily. I hope I'm not keeping you from anything important, Felicity said, cradling the hot drink gratefully. Nothing that can't wait. King settled onto a crate opposite her. Though I admit, I didn't expect company out here today. There was something different about him in this setting, Felicity realized. Away from town, from prying eyes, he seemed more relaxed, the formal reserve he usually maintained softened by the intimate surroundings. Your men said you're building a house, she said, looking for a safe topic of conversation. They talk too much, King said with a rueful smile. But yes, I am. Just over the rise there. It seemed sudden after years of traveling. King studied the contents of his cup. A man gets tired of having no place to call his own. Is that why you're staying in Medicine Bow? Felicity asked. To have a home, partly, he admitted. His gray eyes lifted to meet hers. And partly because I found a reason to stay. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken words. Felicity's heart beat faster as King set aside his coffee cup and leaned forward, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his eyes. Felicity, he began, his voice low and earnest. I need to tell you something. Before he could continue, a crash of thunder shook the barn, startling them both. It was followed by the sound of frightened horses and a man's shout. King was on his feet instantly. Stay here, he ordered, grabbing a slicker from a hook by the door. Felicity waited anxiously as the sound of voices drifted in from the main barn. Minutes later, King returned, followed by a drenched and mud-spattered cowboy. Miss Eastwood, this is Jim Ryder, one of my hands, King introduced. Jim, Miss Eastwood was caught in the storm as well. The cowboy nodded respectfully. Madam, sorry to interrupt, but we got trouble, boss. Tucker's men cut the fence in the north pasture. Storm spooked the new herd and they're scattered halfway to the mountains. King's expression darkened. How many men do we have out there? Just Martinez and the kid. Rest are back at the main house. Saddle my horse, King ordered. We'll head out as soon as this squall passes. After Ryder left, King turned to Felicity. I'm sorry, but I have to go. Of course, she said, understanding the urgency. Cattle represented a rancher's livelihood. A scattered herd could mean financial ruin. Is there anything I can do? King shook his head. Just stay here until the storm breaks. Ryder will see you safely home before he joins us. The moment between them had passed, replaced by practical concerns. Yet as King prepared to leave, gathering ropes and rain gear, Felicity couldn't help wondering what he had been about to tell her. "Be careful," she said as he headed for the door. "Tucker's men might still be out there." King paused, looking back at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "I'll come by your place when we've rounded up the herd. There's still that conversation we need to finish." After he left, Felicity sat by the stove, listening to the rain gradually subside and wondering what path her life was taking. She had gone from a desperate young woman being wagered in a poker game to what? A woman with choices. A woman being courted by the most eligible bachelor in the county. Was that what was happening? Was Zachariah King courting her? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. After her father's betrayal, Felicity had promised herself she would never depend on a man again. Yet with King, dependence didn't seem to be what he was offering. Instead, he offered respect, protection without possession, companionship without demands. By the time Ryder returned to escort her home, the rain had stopped and the western sky was clearing. The cowboy was polite but reserved during their ride, answering her questions about the ranch with brief responses. "Mr. King speaks highly of you, Miss Eastwood," Ryder said as they approached her cabin. "Says you're the bravest woman he's ever met." Felicity flushed with pleasure. "He's too kind." Ryder shook his head. "Boss ain't one for empty flattery. If he says it, he means it." After ensuring she was safely inside, Ryder departed to join the search for the scattered cattle. Felicity changed into dry clothes and set about her evening chores, all the while replaying the afternoon's interrupted moment in her mind. 3 days passed with no word from King. Felicity tried to focus on her garden and her mending, but worry gnawed at her. Had there been trouble with Tucker's men? Was King hurt, or worse? On the 4th day, she could stand the uncertainty no longer. Harnessing her horse to the small wagon her father had left behind, she set out for King's ranch. The Thompson place, now King's property, lay 5 miles west of Medicine Bow. As Felicity approached, she could see the changes already taking place. New fencing lined the road, and a large barn had been constructed near the old one. Beyond it, on a gentle rise overlooking a creek, the framework of a substantial house was taking shape. Several cowboys were working in the corral, breaking horses from the look of it. They paused, watching curiously as Felicity drove up. "Miss Eastwood," one called, recognizing her. "You looking for the boss?" "Yes," Felicity said, suddenly self-conscious. What if King thought she was being forward, coming to his ranch uninvited? "He ain't here," the cowboy said, approaching the wagon. "Rode out to the line shack on the North Range yesterday. Won't be back till tomorrow, I reckon." "Oh," disappointment flooded through her. "Is everything all right? I heard about the cattle." "Got most of 'em back," the man assured her. "But Tucker's been causing more trouble. Shot one of our hands 2 nights back." Felicity gasped. "Is he?" "He'll live. Doc Wilson's tending him at the bunkhouse. Boss went to check the boundary line, make sure Tucker's men ain't trespassing again." Relief that King was safe mingled with concern over the escalating conflict. "Please tell Mr. King I came by," Felicity said, gathering the reins to leave. "You want to leave a message?" the cowboy asked. "Boss would want to know what brought you out here." Felicity hesitated, then nodded. "Just tell him I was worried, and that I'm looking forward to finishing our conversation." As she drove away, Felicity didn't notice the rider watching from a distant ridge, a rider who turned his horse to follow her at a discreet distance. It was nearly dusk when she reached her cabin. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard as she unhitched her horse and led it to the small corral. The animals were restless, sensing something Felicity didn't immediately perceive. Then she saw at the cabin door, which she distinctly remembered latching, stood slightly ajar. Felicity froze, her pulse quickening. Someone had been here, might still be here. Quietly, she backed toward the barn where the shotgun was stored. "Looking for this?" came a familiar, unwelcome voice. Clem Tucker stepped out of the shadows by the barn, her shotgun held casually in his meaty hands. He wasn't alone. Two rough-looking men flanked him, their expressions predatory. "Mr. Tucker," Felicity said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "This is private property." Tucker smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "That's what I came to discuss, Miss Eastwood. The matter of property." He gestured toward the cabin. "Shall we continue this conversation inside, more civilized that way?" Felicity stood her ground. "Say what you've come to say and then leave." Tucker's smile vanished. "I ain't asking, girl. Either you walk in there under your own power or my boys will carry you." Seeing no choice, Felicity moved toward the cabin, her mind racing. King wouldn't be back until tomorrow. No one knew Tucker was here. Her only hope was to keep him talking, to find some way to delay whatever he had planned. Inside, the cabin showed signs of Tucker's intrusion, drawers pulled open, her few possessions rifled through. The deed to the property lay on the table, along with the pouch of money King had given her. "Interesting rating," Tucker said, nodding toward the deed as he settled his bulk into a chair. "Seems King went to a lot of trouble to make sure this place was legally yours." "What do you want, Mr. Tucker?" Felicity demanded. "Same thing I've always wanted, this land. It's the key to controlling the water rights for the whole valley." Tucker leaned forward. "Your daddy knew that. It's why he wouldn't sell, even when he was drowning in debt." "And now you think I'll sell to you?" Felicity asked incredulously. Tucker laughed, an ugly sound. "Oh, you'll do more than sell, Miss Eastwood. You'll sign this." He pulled a document from inside his vest. "It's a marriage contract. Once we're husband and wife, what's yours becomes mine, legal and proper." Horror washed over Felicity. "I will never marry you." "You don't have much choice," Tucker said calmly. "King ain't here to protect you now, and even if you scream, ain't nobody going to hear you out here." "My answer is no," Felicity stated firmly. "Now get out." Tucker's face darkened with anger. He gestured to one of his men. "Hold her." The man grabbed Felicity's arms, pinning them behind her painfully as she struggled. Tucker approached, his breath hot on her face. "You think you're too good for me. That King wants you for anything but the same thing I do, land and a warm body in his bed. King is twice the man you are," Felicity spat. Tucker's hand cracked across her face, the force of the blow making her ears ring. "King is a drifter playing at being respectable. Once he gets what he wants, he'll move on. But me, I'm here to stay." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Last chance. Sign the papers and I'll make this easy on you. Refuse, and my boys here get to have some fun before I drag you to the preacher." Felicity's heart hammered in her chest, fear and fury warring within her. She knew Tucker wasn't bluffing. Men like him took what they wanted, and the law rarely interfered with the powerful. "I'll never be your wife," she said, her voice low and fierce. "Not in any way that matters." Tucker's face contorted with rage. "Have it your way." He turned to his men. "Tie her up. We'll take her to my place, see if a few days without food or water changes her mind." The man holding her produced a length of rope, while the other moved to help. In that moment of distraction, Felicity made her move. She brought her heel down hard on her captor's instep, then slammed her head back against his nose when his grip loosened. The man howled in pain and released her. Felicity lunged for the door, but Tucker was faster, catching her arm and throwing her violently against the table. Pain exploded in her side as she fell to the floor. "You'll pay for that, girl," Tucker snarled, advancing on her. The crack of a gunshot froze everyone in place. A second shot followed, and the window beside Tucker's head shattered. The next one goes between your eyes, Tucker. Zachariah King stood in the doorway, his revolver trained steadily on Tucker's face. Behind him, Felicity could see more men King's cowboys, their own weapons drawn. "This ain't your business, King," Tucker blustered, though his face had gone pale. "You made it my business when you set foot on Miss Eastwood's property," King replied, his voice deadly calm. "Now step away from her." When Tucker hesitated, King cocked his revolver. "I won't ask again." Tucker's men had already raised their hands, recognizing they were outmatched. After a moment's standoff, Tucker stepped back, his expression murderous. "Jim, get Miss Eastwood," King ordered, not taking his eyes off Tucker. Ryder hurried to Felicity's side, helping her gently to her feet. She winced at the pain in her ribs where she'd struck the table. "You're hurt," King observed, his jaw tightening. "It's nothing," Felicity assured him, though the throbbing in her side suggested otherwise. King's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Martinez, Cooper, take these two outside," he said, indicating Tucker's men. "Ryder, escort Miss Eastwood to the porch. I need a private word with Mr. Tucker." "Zach," Ryder began, concerned. "Do as I say," King cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. As Felicity was led outside, she glanced back to see King and Tucker facing each other, tension radiating between them like heat from a forge. On the porch, Ryder offered her a canteen of water. "Boss has been looking for you since we got your message," he explained. "When we found Tucker's tracks heading toward your place, he rode like the devil himself was after him." Before Felicity could respond, the sound of a struggle erupted from inside the cabin, followed by a crash and a strangled cry. She started toward the door, but Ryder held her back. "Let the boss handle it," he advised. Minutes later, King emerged, dragging a bloodied and semi-conscious Tucker by the collar. He threw the larger man off the porch like a sack of grain. "Get him on his horse," King ordered his men. "Then escort Mr. Tucker and his friends to the edge of the county. Make sure they understand what will happen if they ever come back." As Tucker was hauled away, King turned to Felicity, his fierce expression softening instantly. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though tears threatened to spill from her eyes now that the danger had passed. "How did you know?" "One of Tucker's men got drunk in town and started boasting about his boss's plans," King explained. "By the time I heard about it, you'd already left the ranch." He stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "Did they hurt you?" "Just my pride," Felicity said, attempting a smile despite her trembling limbs. "And possibly a rib." Without warning, King pulled her gently into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she were made of porcelain. "I thought I wouldn't get here in time," he murmured into her hair. "When I saw his men watching your place." Felicity allowed herself to sink into his embrace, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek more comforting than any words could be. After everything that had happened, her father's betrayal, Tucker's attack, she should be wary of trusting any man. Yet in King's arms she felt not trapped but sheltered, not possessed but cherished. "You saved my life," she whispered. King drew back slightly to look at her, his gray eyes intense. "You saved yourself, Felicity. I just helped even the odds." The pride in his voice warmed her more than she could express. Here was a man who valued her strength rather than seeking to diminish it, who saw her as an equal to be respected rather than a prize to be claimed. "About that conversation we never finished," King began, his voice low and serious. Before he could continue, Ryder approached. "Boss, we need to get Miss Eastwood to the doctor. That bruise on her face is swelling something fierce." King's expression clouded with concern. "You're right. Our conversation can wait." Despite Felicity's protests, King insisted on taking her to Medicine Bow that very night to be examined by Doc Wilson. The elderly physician confirmed that she had indeed cracked a rib, though thankfully nothing was broken. He bound her torso tightly and provided laudanum for the pain, which Felicity accepted but had no intention of taking. She needed her wits about her. She shouldn't be alone for a few days, Doc Wilson advised King. That cabin of hers is too isolated if complications arise. She can stay at my ranch, King said immediately. The housekeeper will look after her. I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself, Felicity objected, though the throbbing in her side suggested otherwise. King's expression softened. I know you are, but humor me just this once. Something in his eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before, made Felicity relent. Just until I'm healed, she agreed reluctantly. The old Thompson ranch house had been converted into temporary quarters while the new house was being built. It was far from luxurious, but the bedroom prepared for Felicity was clean and comfortable, with fresh linens and a vase of wildflowers on the dresser. Mrs. Abernathy, King's housekeeper, was a no-nonsense widow in her 50s who treated Felicity with brisk kindness. Mr. King says you're to have anything you need, she informed Felicity. And you're not to worry about a thing until you're well. Despite her initial resistance, Felicity found herself enjoying the respite. Her days were spent resting on the shaded porch, reading books from King's surprisingly extensive library, or chatting with Mrs. Abernathy as the older woman went about her chores. King himself was often absent during daylight hours, overseeing the roundup of the remaining scattered cattle and the construction of his new house. But each evening, he would join Felicity for supper, their conversations ranging from literature to politics to their childhood memories. On her third night at the ranch, they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. The day had been unusually warm for early September, but a cool breeze now swept across the prairie. Your new house is coming along quickly, Felicity observed. From the porch, she could see the structure taking shape on the distant rise. The men are working double shifts, King replied. I want it finished before winter sets in. It's going to be beautiful, she said sincerely. The design was grander than most homes in Medicine Bow, with a wide veranda and tall windows to capture the spectacular views. King studied her face in the fading light. Do you think you could be happy in a house like that, Felicity? The question caught her off guard. I suppose anyone could be happy in such a fine home. That's not what I asked. King turned to face her fully. Could you be happy there? With me? Felicity's heart seemed to stop, then race forward at double speed. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Zachariah? A smile touched his lips at her use of his given name. I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife, not because of any debt or obligation, but because I believe we could build a good life together. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I've never met a woman with your courage or your spirit. You've faced betrayal and violence, yet you remain unbroken. I admire that more than I can say. Felicity stared at their joined hands, emotions swirling within her. You barely know me. I know enough, King said simply. I know you're kind to those who need kindness and fierce to those who threaten what you love. I know you work harder than anyone I've met. I know your laugh makes my heart feel lighter. He paused, his gray eyes searching hers. What I don't know is if you could ever come to care for me as more than a friend. The vulnerability in his expression touched something deep inside Felicity. This powerful man who commanded respect throughout the county was laying his heart bare before her, asking not demanding, hoping not presuming. I already do, she admitted softly. Care for you, I mean, but I'm afraid. Of what? Of trusting again. Of giving someone power over my life. Felicity's voice wavered. My father taught me how quickly that can be betrayed. King's expression grew serious. I understand your fear, but marriage doesn't have to mean surrender, Felicity, not between equals. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. From the pouch, he produced a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was my mother's, he explained. The only thing of hers I have left. Felicity stared at the delicate ring, emotion tightening her throat. I won't pressure you for an answer now, King continued. Take all the time you need. The ring is yours either way, a gift freely given with no strings attached. Why? Felicity whispered. Why me? You could have any woman in the territory. King's smile was tender. Because from the moment I saw you standing in that cabin, refusing to be broken by your father's foolishness, I knew you were someone special, someone worth changing my wandering ways for. He placed the ring in her palm and gently closed her fingers around it. Whatever you decide, know this. You will always have my respect and protection. Those aren't conditional on your answer. With that, he rose, pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, and left her alone with her thoughts. Felicity sat on the porch long after darkness fell, the ring warm in her palm. Her mind whirled with memories of King returning her deed, of his steadfast protection without possession, of the respect in his eyes when he looked at her. Was it possible to build a marriage on such a foundation? A partnership rather than an ownership. Her mother and father had loved each other once, before grief and alcohol poisoned their relationship. Could she and Zachariah forge something stronger, something that could withstand the harsh realities of frontier life? As the stars appeared overhead, Felicity made her decision. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Felicity dressed carefully in her blue gingham, her bruised ribs still tender but healing. She found King in the makeshift office he'd set up in what had once been the ranch house's parlor. He looked up as she entered, his expression cautiously hopeful. "Felicity, how are you feeling this morning?" "Better," she said, her heart pounding as she moved closer to his desk. "Well enough to go home, I think." Disappointment flickered across his face, though he quickly masked it. "Of course, I'll have Ryder drive you whenever you're ready." "That's not what I came to tell you," Felicity said, gathering her courage. She opened her hand, revealing the ring resting on her palm. "I've been thinking about this all night." King stood slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. And I realized something," Felicity continued. "My father gambled me away because he saw me as property, not as a person. You won me, but you gave me back my freedom instead." She stepped closer, close enough to catch the scent of soap and leather that she'd come to associate with him. "That's when I started to fall in love with you, though I didn't recognize it then. Not when you protected me from Tucker or brought me supplies or danced with me at the social." Zachariah's breath caught audibly. "Felicity, it was when you gave me a choice," she said simply. "When you respected me enough to let me decide my own fate." She held out the ring to him. "My answer is yes, Zachariah. I would be honored to become your wife, to build a life and a home with you." Joy transformed his features as he took the ring with slightly trembling fingers. "You're sure?" In response, Felicity offered her left hand. "I've never been more certain of anything." Zachariah slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. Then, with infinite tenderness, he cupped her face in his hands and lowered his lips to hers in their first kiss, gentle at first, mindful of her bruises, then deepening as she responded with unexpected passion. When they finally parted, both breathless, Zachariah rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you won't regret this, Felicity. I'll spend my life making sure of it." "I'm going to hold you to that, Mr. King," she replied, a smile blooming across her face. Their wedding took place 6 weeks later, on a golden October afternoon. The new house, while not entirely finished, was complete enough to host the celebration. It seemed half the county turned out for the occasion, curious to see the notorious ghost finally settling down and to witness Felicity Eastwood's remarkable change of fortune. Pastor Evans performed the ceremony on the front porch of the King Ranch house, with Tommy serving as ring bearer and Mrs. Abernathy as Felicity's matron of honor. Felicity wore her mother's wedding dress, altered and embellished by the ladies of the church sewing circle, who had embraced her once they understood the truth of her situation. As they exchanged vows, Felicity gazed up into Zachariah's gray eyes and saw not possession but partnership, not ownership but devotion. When he slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, but his voice broke slightly on the words "with this ring, I thee wed." The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. As the party continued around them, Zachariah led Felicity away from the crowd to a quiet spot overlooking the creek. "Happy, Mrs. King?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Very," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't believe how much has changed in just a few months." "Some things haven't changed," Zachariah pointed out. "You're still the bravest woman I know, and I'm still the luckiest man in the territory." As they stood together under the star-filled Wyoming sky, Felicity reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. Her father's desperate gamble, intended to rob her of choice, had instead led her to a man who valued her freedom above all else. A man who had won her in a game of chance, only to give her back her life and her future. "What are you thinking about?" Zachariah asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best," she replied. "If my father hadn't wagered me in that poker game, we might never have met." "I'd have found you somehow," Zachariah said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Felicity." As his lips met hers beneath the endless prairie sky, Felicity King believed him with all her heart. In the years that followed, the King Ranch prospered and expanded. Zachariah's business acumen, combined with Felicity's practical management, created one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. Their home became known for its hospitality, with Felicity hosting gatherings that brought together all segments of the community. Clem Tucker eventually left Medicine Bow. His influence diminished after his confrontation with King became public knowledge. Orville Eastwood never returned, though Felicity received occasional letters from Laramie indicating he had found sobriety and some measure of peace in his new life. 2 years after their wedding, Felicity gave birth to their first child, a son they named William, after Zachariah's father. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 18 months later with her mother's golden brown hair and her father's determined gray eyes. As their family grew, so did their legacy, built on mutual respect and unwavering love. On their 10th anniversary, Zachariah presented Felicity with a deed to a small piece of property, her father's original homestead, which he had quietly purchased years earlier. "I thought you might want to decide what becomes of it," he explained as they rode out to view the now abandoned cabin. "It's yours, to keep or sell or burn to the ground if that would bring you peace." Felicity dismounted, walking slowly around the weathered structure where she had experienced both her darkest moments and the first stirrings of hope. Memories flooded back of her father's betrayal, of Zachariah standing in the doorway returning her deed, of Tucker's attack and King's rescue. "I know what I want to do with it," she said finally, turning to her husband with shining eyes. "I want to turn it into a shelter, a safe place for women with nowhere else to go. Women who need a chance to rebuild their lives, just as I once did." Zachariah's face lit with pride and love. "I think that's the perfect solution," As they rode home together under the vast Wyoming sky, Felicity reflected on the unexpected journey her life had taken. From a desperate young woman being gambled away in a poker game to the confident mistress of a prosperous ranch, mother to 3 beautiful children, and soon to be founder of a refuge for women in need. All because a man who could have claimed her as a prize had instead recognized her worth as a human being, had given her back her freedom and her future, and in doing so, had won something far more valuable than any poker pot, her heart, freely given forever.